Welcome back to another episode of Learn to Cook on a Budget. We are making a pureed soup, one of my favorites, a triple squash soup using acorn, butternut, and yellow squash. We're gonna break down how to get this ready to go, how to get it pureed to perfection so you can have a delicious, magical soup for dinner. If you haven't yet watched the homemade stock video, I would encourage you to do that because you'll get all of the guidelines for making the perfect soup. We're gonna kind of go through it here. It'll naturally sort of happen as we go throughout this cooking lesson, but I'm not gonna specifically call out those guidelines, so definitely go and watch that if you're curious about getting all of those. So the first thing that we're gonna start with is our aromatics. In the case of this soup, it's gonna be just green onions and a little olive oil just for a second, and then we're gonna add in all of the other vegetables. So in order to get all of this ready to go, we need to get this acorn squash peeled and diced. We need to get the yellow squash diced up as well, and I already did this pre-done in an effort to show you how there is a convenient way to do it, but it's gonna cost more. You can absolutely buy a butternut squash, I would say a small to medium sized one, to get the amount that you need for this, and then you can peel it and cube it up. I'm gonna teach you an easy way to do that as well. So stick around and we're gonna get to cooking this triple squash soup. Winter squash, like butternut, acorn, spaghetti squash, can be a bear to deal with when it comes to cutting them up, which is why the bag of the pre-cut one is awfully convenient, but I'm gonna show you how to get them softened up very quickly, and that is to put them in the microwave. But before we do that, we need to slit them. So I'm just gonna add a couple of slits. Be very careful. They tend to be a little bit. That's just to let a little bit of steam out as it's cooking. I'm just gonna put it like that into a microwavable dish, and we're gonna microwave it for a couple of minutes. And when it's finished microwaving, it'll be soft. This works really well for a butternut squash, acorn squash, or spaghetti squash. You can also cook them entirely in the microwave. In that case, you would want to slice it open lengthwise, either of the three squashes, and then place them flesh side up, and then the microwave will soften the flesh, and you can either scoop it out. In all three cases, you could scoop it out. The spaghetti squash will be that noodly spaghetti style, and then the other two will be easier to sort of mash up and serve as a side dish or mix into, I don't know, macaroni and cheese. Butternut squash mac and cheese is the latest rage, although I would say just buy it already made because it's a lot of work to make that from scratch. Not opposed to it. I'm always down for something like that, but if you need a quick, easy, convenient dinner, definitely just grab it already made that way. Anywho, so this we're gonna let microwave for a couple minutes. While that's happening, I am going to chop up these green onions all the way down to the stem. I want the white part and the green part to be sauteing. This is gonna get pureed, so it doesn't need to be super small. And when you get to the part where you run out of onion, so inside, I know you can't really see this, but if you look in here, you'll see a little bit of clear. That still means there's onion flavor in there. When you get to the end here and it's only green, no more onion left. So stop when you get to that point. So I will generally cut up until I see that most of the onion has been found and chopped into my pile that way. And then you could use this for a stock or your compost or scraps or whatever. I'm bringing my scraps bowl back. And then the same thing with the squash. We are gonna puree this. I just wanna get it into smaller pieces so it cooks in about 15-20 minutes. The same amount of time it's gonna take for these, the acorn squash and the butternut squash to cook. This is a softer squash. Obviously it's easy for me to cut through, you can see that, but I'm still gonna cut it into probably quarter half-inch pieces. I need it to be separated from my green onions because those are being sauteed first. Those are my aromatics, and then these are my veggies I'm gonna add in later. You might be wondering about the orange. The orange is a really great citrus and sweet complement to this soup. Nutmeg is also a really great and powerful and slightly sweet complement as well. I'm gonna add the orange in with the olive oil and the zest as well, so I get that flavor in there. I often will add things like this at the end, but in today's, like we will add the nutmeg at the end, but in today's case, I am gonna add the orange at the beginning, just to get that extra flavor cooking throughout the soup as it simmers. So that should be almost done. Look at this timing. I love that when that happens. All right, I am gonna zest my orange. I want a little bit of that flavor in with the green onions, but I'm gonna go ahead and do that when I add the onions. So I'm just gonna, I cut that backwards, but that's okay. I meant to cut it the other way. I was thinking about the zesting as I was cutting. That's okay. I would normally cut this lengthwise. It's easier to juice. It'll still juice just fine. If you have one of those citrus juicers, you can use that. You can juice and zest and juice. It doesn't matter which order you do it in. I'm only going to use a little bit of this edge for the zesting. I'm not going to use too much. So it's really all going to work out, I promise. It's all going in the pot together. It's all going to be delicious, so that's fine, even though I cut that backwards. Our acorn squash is out of the oven and the stalk is over there being unruly. I'm going to be really careful. This is a great use of our pinch mitt in holding this down. It's actually a lot softer. You can even see in the color that it's softer. So you can peel, like here. You can just peel down. You can also slice down. Because of the notches of this, you can see how hot that is too. I prefer to cut a butternut squash that has a little thicker skin, but this acorn squash is really, it has thin skin, but it also has these awkward edges, and so I'm gonna just go ahead and peel this down, and then I'm using my pinch mitt to hold it because you can see that this guy is literally smoking hot. But once I peel and turn this around and peel all around, then it's really easy to cut and remove the seeds from the inside. You could also lop off the top. Should be a lot easier to see how easy that is. I could barely get this slit open a few minutes ago. And there we have that. So again, you could kind of slice down, but you're going to take a lot of flesh with you. That's why I feel like peeling is a better choice. See how much flesh we lost there? Peeling is really a better choice with this acorn squash. Again, the butternut squash doesn't have all these ridges, so it's a little bit easier to slice down with your knife, and it has a thicker skin. So we got this guy peeled, and now we got to get the seeds out. I'm gonna grab a spoon to do that. I'm just gonna cut down the middle. You can see the seedy, stringy mess. I'm still got my pinch mitt here because it's not quite the steam bath that you get from pouring out pasta, straining pasta, but a little steam bath. I don't really want all this stringiness here. I don't want that in my soup. It will puree, but I don't want to have like dental floss with my butternut squash soup. That's going to be a pass for me. So we want to get as much of this out as we can. And then we're going to cut it into cubes. And then it will be time to assemble our soup. You could also save these seeds and roast them, just like you would roast a pumpkin seed. Squash seeds are really great. Toss them in a little bit of butter or oil and some seasoning. Roasty toasty, delicious. If you wanted to keep those, to do that. Now I'm gonna flip these guys over. Get these seeds out of here. If you see any more skin, I see a little tiny piece here. Little tiny pieces, I'm just gonna shave those off. We wanna save as much of this flesh as we can. There we go. And then we're just gonna cut down. Much easier to cut after it's been microwaved. And again, it's getting pureed, so we just don't want the seeds and as much stringiness as possible out of there. Here we go. We're gonna start with the aromatics, which is going to be a little olive oil. I'm gonna do over high heat. And then we're gonna do our green onions in there. Another spinella. Are we surprised? No. All right, let me just give this a little toss. And then the next thing I'm gonna do is squeeze in the orange, even though I cut it wrong. Juice is just fine, friends. Juice is just fine. Obviously, if you need to fish out any seeds, do that, or you could squeeze it upside down as well. I didn't see any seeds when I cut it, so I think we're good. If you have a citrus juicer, use that. You'll get the most juice. Okay, I need this to zest, so I'm gonna let it sit like that. And again, this citrus is just to brighten up the flavor a little bit. Squash tends to be, tangy is not the right word. It just needs to be brightened up. So we're gonna do that with the orange and the nutmeg. So I'm just going to do this right over, this is my microplaner, you have your zester, whatever you have, just right over the top. These kind of broke awkwardly, so I might end up zesting both of these. The zest has just such a great and powerful flavor, which is why we're zesting as well. I'm gonna need to scoop it out with my little spinella here. It's stuck. Skinny spinella to the rescue. Then we're gonna start layering. It only takes about a minute. These green onions don't take long. They're so small and tender. So I'm gonna start next with our stock, which is gonna be our liquid. In this case, it's gonna be 4 cups of beef stock and 4 cups of water. The water will help soften and cook the squash. And then I'm gonna add in all of the squash together, and we're gonna cook this for about 20-25 minutes or until everything's tender. But since this yellow squash is already pretty soft, we did microwave that acorn squash. It might actually even be faster than that, but we need to get all of these flavors mixing and mingling and hanging out. This is a small butternut squash worth cubed already. Just a quick convenience thing if you need it. It can be more expensive, so just be mindful of that. But I wanted to show you that, and then our acorn squash that we cut up. So now that everything is in here, we are going to put the lid on. Once it starts bubbling, I will reduce heat to simmer and let that simmer for about 20 minutes, and then it'll be time to puree it. One last thing, I do not recommend adding the dairy now. I usually will stir in cream, nutmeg, and a little salt and pepper after it has been pureed. So go ahead and wait on the dairy and use that as more of a finisher and a way to thicken up your pureed soup. Time to puree our squash soup. I'm gonna bring it over here. I have my blender ready to go. The goal of a pureed soup is really that nice, smooth, and creamy consistency. So I would recommend using a blender to puree all of this together. You can use a food processor or an immersion blender. An immersion blender won't get it quite to the same consistency. I just prefer to use a blender. It's what I have. And the most important thing to know about this next step in the process is, in order to avoid a volcanic situation with our blender, we need to blend in batches. So I'm just gonna ladle in some of the cooked squash with the juice. You want the juice to be in there because that will create that smoothness. And then I'm gonna transfer it to this other pot, put this onto the stovetop to add in the cream. I'm gonna actually just do 2 scoops. We'll probably do this in 3 batches. We're going to attempt to do this even though this is very warm. If you have a few extra minutes to let this cool down before doing this, I would recommend that. The heat that builds up from the soup and the blending is what can create that volcanic situation, but we're gonna just hope that that does not happen. And I cannot see what's happening over here, so hang on. Doesn't that look magical? Okay, see, it doesn't take much. Just a quick puree. It's so hot, it's like suction. Okay. All right, and we're gonna just keep repeating this process until all of this is blended and nice and smooth. Look at how gorgeous that is. Round 2, it has like just this hint of orange. I don't know if you can smell it over there, Lauren, but it's like just this gorgeous hint of orange that's gonna be perfect. And I'm gonna just do, I'm gonna try and do 1 more scoop so that we can do a 3rd round, and then we have everything pureed. Uh-oh. Well, you know. Okay, and this will get a little bit thicker when we add the cream. So I'm gonna leave behind about a cup or so of stock, or of this liquid. I just don't want it to be too loose compared to what we already have. It will thicken up in a second as we mix it with the cream. That's a lot. Yeah, I can tell that this consistency is different from those first 2 batches because they were just so much heavier on the squash, which is okay. We're gonna simmer it a couple more minutes with the cream, and so it will thicken up a little bit further. Oh, stunning. Just gorgeous. Hello, lunch. Okay, so I'm gonna transfer this back over to the stovetop and then stir in the heavy cream. All right, we're gonna finish our squash soup back on the stovetop super quick. I'm just gonna bring it up to a simmer again, let a little bit more of that liquid steam off, and then I'm going to swirl in about 1/4 cup of cream. That will add that creaminess to it. Okay, last we're gonna finish this off with a pinch of salt and pepper. I would definitely recommend using a white pepper just so you don't see it. But black pepper is going to be just fine as well. And of course you can add a little bit more to your plates once you go to serve them. You could also add a touch of nutmeg at this time, or you can add the nutmeg to your serving bowls. Last, we are going to ladle our soup into bowls. I usually ladle right over, keep from making a giant mess. And then we are going to finish it with a couple dashes of nutmeg. Of course, if you want this to thicken up, you can let it simmer a little bit longer on the stovetop. I'm gonna do a little dash of nutmeg. You could mix the nutmeg in as well. It's more than a dash. I mean, I'm not gonna be sad about that nutmeg on there. And then just a little bit of crunchiness. Some will float, some will sink. Green onions, and there we have it. Our pureed triple squash soup is ready for dinner. So this is the pureed soup. We did our aromatics first. We added our liquid, we added our vegetables, we let it simmer to perfection, we added our finisher. Those are kind of the guidelines and the basic steps of putting together a soup or a chili. So that's a little quick look at how that is. If you need this to thicken up, you can again let it simmer a little bit longer. It will thicken as it cools as well. You could use a thickening agent like a cornstarch, but I would not recommend that unless you were really desperate and the soup was really too thin. But in this case, it's just perfect. The cream will also help thicken it up as well. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode. I hope you learned something new. I'm here to help you learn how to cook so that you can make more food at home. You can save more money on food in general by eating out less, take less DoorDash. Oh my goodness, please stop doing DoorDash. If you're doing DoorDash, and make this instead. You're gonna save yourself a whole lot of money, not just today, but in the future as well. Please like this video. You can also subscribe to the channel. We release new episodes in the Learn to Cook on a Budget series at noon Central on Wednesdays. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.